A catalyst is defined as an object or a person that makes a difference. And while Jesus does not use this word catalyst in the gospel passage we've just heard, it is precisely what Jesus is talking about. In his preaching, Jesus used images and referred to experiences that were so common that anyone could relate to them. In today's gospel, Jesus uses two examples of things that probably every human person who ever lived has experienced: salt and light. Although perhaps culturally and historically our experience of salt and light may be different from that of our ancestors, knowing what both of them are and recognizing our need for both is universal. Salt is essential for the survival of every living being. We're told that our bodies are 60 to 70% water, and our bodily fluids, such as blood and saliva, consist of 9% salt. The word saliva is derived from the Latin word for salt, S-A-L, sal. At one time in the ancient world, salt was used as a form of currency, hence the word salary. The use of salt at the time of Jesus Christ was different from our modern use of salt in the Western world. One major use of salt was to preserve food. Since refrigeration was unheard of in biblical times and is still non-existent in vast areas of the earth, salt was and is an important economic factor as a preservative in keeping food from getting rotten. In the West, any one of us who has eaten ham has had the experience of eating meat that was preserved with salt. Another use of salt in these countries and cultures was as fuel. John Pilch, in discussing the cultural world of Jesus, explains it this way. He writes, "The common fuel for the oven was something that was more plentiful than wood, camel or donkey dung. One of the duties each girl had to learn was to collect the dung, mix salt in it, and mold it into patties to be left to dry in the sun. In the Middle East and in many third world countries today, such dung patties are still used as fuel. A slab of salt was placed at the base of the oven, and upon it the salted dung patty. Salt has catalytic properties which cause the dung to burn. Eventually, the salt, however, loses its catalytic ability and becomes useless. Or as Jesus remarks, it's good for nothing but to be thrown outside, where it can still provide sure footing in a muddy road." Our own use of salt serves various purposes, but perhaps the most prominent three are for health, for safety, and for flavor. How many times did your mother tell you to gargle with warm salt water when you had a sore throat? Anyone residing in Buffalo knows the necessity of having salt available when winter weather creates ice on the roads, the sidewalks, and the stairs. It's estimated that in the United States alone, some 25 million tons of salt are used annually to melt ice off the roads. And even an amateur cook knows that the meal will be flat and bland if the right amount of salt is not used in the recipe. The other image that Jesus uses in today's gospel is that of light. Light, as simple as it may seem, is a very complicated phenomenon. Whereas the Encyclopedia Britannica devotes only 7 columns to salt, it gives 50 columns to light. The article begins by confessing this: it is not even possible to say what light is, because light is essentially more primitive than any of the terms that might be used to explain it. To understand light involves several scientific concepts, most of which I cannot pronounce, let alone understand. So suffice it to say that we all know when light is present and when it is not. Probably we've all had that clumsy feeling that comes over us when there's a sudden power failure and we start stumbling around in the dark trying to find the flashlight that we stored in that obvious place, knowing that someday this would happen. Of course, it's never in the place we presumed it would be. Thank God for the light now on my cell phone. Light is essential for seeing and for being seen. Although Jesus says a city set on a mountain cannot be hidden, Isn't that precisely what the British tried to do during World War II? The blackout of London during the Blitz of 1940 involved the practice of collectively minimizing outdoor light. This was done to prevent crews of German aircraft from being able to identify their targets by sight. In coastal regions, a shoreside blackout of city lights also helped to protect ships, silhouetted against artificial light, from being seen farther out at sea by enemy submarines. Now, neither salt nor light are ends in themselves. You don't just sit down and start eating a bowl of salt, nor do you light a lamp or a candle and then stare into the bulb or the flame. Their purpose is to change the world around them. Jesus uses these two universal, yet small, often unnoticed, and seemingly insignificant substances, salt and light, to demonstrate the differences that his followers should make in the world. Just as both salt and light are catalysts and make a difference by their presence or their absence, we as followers of Jesus Christ are called to be catalysts, to change whatever situation we may be in, to be a catalyst to make things better. How can we do this? We can return to today's first reading when we heard Isaiah tell us, "Thus says the Lord, share your bread with the hungry, shelter the oppressed, clothe the naked when you see them, and do not turn your back on your own." Doesn't Jesus echo this in his description of the Last Judgment, when the king says to those on his right, "When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me." In small, ordinary, almost insignificant actions, we allow God to perform miracles for others through us. Actions that bring others healing, hope, safety, and joy. Just as salt and light are of no use in and of themselves, but have immeasurable value as catalysts, whose purpose is to change the situation around them, so too we are called to be disciples, catalysts, not for our own sake, but for the sake of the world.